I'm confident you're going to come away with at least some new information, hopefully a lot of new information. So over our time here this morning, we're going to walk through 3 broad questions of, 1, what is the OnTrack process? You've been at your school, you may be familiar with this, or you may have heard about it in the periphery, but you want to better understand what is this thing we're calling the OnTrack process. 2, why are there OnTrack meetings? What is happening in these meetings? Should I be there? How do I contribute to that? And then 3, who is OnTrack Greenville? So what is OnTrack Greenville as an initiative, and who are OnTrack Greenville in terms of people? I am part of the OnTrack Greenville team. So we'll dig into the difference between really these OnTrack concepts and then OnTrack Greenville. And the hope is that when you emerge, you understand what are these key differences, and then also how you as an individual contribute to this broader process, because you do play a critical role in all 3. So I always like to start with the end in mind. If I tell someone we're going to cover 3 things, and all you really care about is number 2, the whole time I'm talking about 1, you're going to be waiting for number 2. So these are where we're going. 1, the OnTrack process. How do we leverage data to identify what students are needing supports? The OnTrack meetings. How do we leverage the data in an actual meeting setting to figure out what is the best way to meet the needs for that specific student? What are the interventions? How do we provide that support? Then last, OnTrack Greenville as an initiative. How are we convening, pulling together partners in order to serve the students that are in your building? To start us off, I'm going to turn it over to Allison. She's going to talk about the OnTrack process. So that is the mechanism by which we are able to gather data and understand what is going on with our students and our broader school.
Welcome everybody. My name is Allison. Like Taylor said, I am the data and quality specialist for the district. So I oversee GC Source, the intervention connection system, and I also oversee the OnTrack process from the district side of things. So if you've ever been to an OnTrack training, you might recognize me, as well as Ellen Hampshire, who's the MTSS coordinator for the district. So I do OnTrack trainings with her, as well as Jason Mullis, who's the director of psychological services. Today, I'm just going to give you a very brief overview of the OnTrack process as it relates to you, as well as the entire district as a whole, and how we identify and use data to locate the students that are at the highest severity levels within a couple different indicators that we'll talk about, and then use that data to have data-driven conversations about those students and identify the best support or intervention for that student. So to start off, there's lots of research and evidence and data to support that there are 3 main indicators for student success all through their academic performance, but specifically to graduate high school on track and on time. And those 3 indicators are attendance, behavior, and course performance. Now, this is just a general definition for the OnTrack process, but before I go over that, we have OnTrack teams, and we implement the OnTrack process across the entire district and all of our 100 schools. But the special thing about your schools is we have OnTrack Greenville as a partner and support to bring in additional and external partners to provide you even further support there, as well as specific OnTrack facilitators at your schools that their entire role and their entire job is to be the OnTrack facilitator at your school, to implement the process, to host meetings, to facilitate conversations, whereas at other schools across the district, outside of these 6 schools, there are OnTrack facilitators, but they might wear a couple different hats because they might be a counselor who is acting as the OnTrack facilitator, or an admin, or a teacher maybe. So you guys are very special in that you have a designated OnTrack facilitator to help facilitate this process for you, as well as a lot of external support to help students that you have at your schools. So the overall definition for the OnTrack process as a whole is a collaborative problem-solving team process using data and evidence and student information to have data-driven conversations on a weekly or bi-weekly basis as a team, and identify interventions and supports for those students to get them to graduate on track and on time. So that is our goal with the OnTrack process across the entire district. So, does anybody know Ellen Hampshire? No? Oh, okay, yeah. So she, like I said, she's our MTSS coordinator for the district. So these next two slides are going to be a little bit more in her wheelhouse. So if you ever have questions specifically about MTSS, you can reach out to either one of us, but specifically her. So it does mean multi-tiered systems of supports. And what that means is there's a couple of different tiers or levels of student groups within our schools of where we target certain interventions and supports. So there's tier 1, which is a very large group of students. That could be our entire student body, down to about 70% of our student body. Then there's tier 2, which is a little bit smaller of a group, but possibly more of like a classroom size group of students. And then there's tier 3, which is individualized student support. And that has, for the duration of our OnTrack process, been the primary goal of the conversations that we're having, is that individualized student support. But as we know, over the last several years, there's been kind of a shift in the trajectory of where those tiers lie. Because the goal for the tiers is the majority of the students that are struggling should be really in that low risk category. So the majority of our students should be in low risk. And then tier 2 might be that some risk. And then that tier 3 should be prioritized for those individual student needs that are at the very highest of risk and severity level. But as we can see with this upside down triangle, and as I'm sure you've experienced in your schools, the majority of our students are actually all at high risk right now. Most of them are, especially at our schools. And so that has kind of led us to possibly look at things from a broader scheme and see what patterns and themes are going on here that can guide our conversations while we still use data and still help individual students to implement more systemic intervention and support. And so that's where OnTrack comes in, that's where a lot of our partners come in to help with those systemic issues while we're also having these conversations on a weekly and bi-weekly basis about individual students. All right, so now this is kind of more in my wheelhouse, but this is the early warning response system. Has anybody heard of the early warning response system? So EWRS, otherwise known as the early warning response system, is how we identify the students that are at the highest level of severity and prioritize students that need the most intervention and support. And like I mentioned earlier, there are those 3 main indicators for whether a student needs support and intervention, and that's attendance, behavior, and course performance. And we break each of these 3 indicators, A, B, C, down into green, yellow, and red severity levels. And I'm not going to get too deeply into this. If you have more questions about this, I'm happy to answer afterwards as well. But basically, attendance is based off of a percentage of amount of time the student is present at school out of the total amount of days school has been in session. So if school's only been in session for 10 days, so we're 10 days into the school year, but the student's been absent 1 day, technically they've been out 10% of the amount of time. And if you'll see by these percentages, 90% or less average attendance is in the red. So if a student's been out 10% or more of the time already, then they are automatically put into that red severity level. But the lucky thing for them about attendance is as school, more days are in session, that kind of percentage can shrink, and they can go, if they haven't been absent more days than that, they can go from red to yellow to green if they uphold their attendance. So that's by percentage amount of time in school. Behavior is based off of the amount of referrals a student has received and the severity level of that referral. So for instance, a phone violation is not going to be as intensely severe as like vaping or bullying or fighting or vandalism or something like that. So behavior is based off the amount of referrals a student has, but also the severity level of that referral. So they only need one very high severity level referral, like one bullying, one fighting, to be immediately in the red. But they need a couple phone violations or ID violations before they can rise the ranks in that severity level. And then finally, course grades, obviously, is based off of their course performance. So basically, if a student is not failing anything, they're pretty good. Okay, so if they have an A through a D in any course, they're still in the green. As soon as they start failing, either a core or a non-core course, they're going to rise the ranks in that severity level. So you can see, in order to be in the red, you have to have 2 or more Fs in a core course, which is math, English, science, or social studies. So does this make sense? This is how we evaluate a student's attendance, behavior, and course performance to figure out which students need the most support and where they're flagging. So we call, as they kind of go up in the ranking there, that's them flagging through the EWRS system. There are 2 main pathways for a student to be recommended to the OnTrack process or to be considered a good candidate for the OnTrack process. And that is the early warning response system, which is what we just looked at, which is that attendance, behavior, and course performance data, or staff referrals, you guys. So this is something that's become even more crucial and important over the last several years as we've seen students flagging more and more and more. It's really hard to prioritize students just off just off data solely when 200 students are in the red, right? Because a lot of students are failing, a lot of students are chronically absent, a lot of students are acting up, right? It's really hard to prioritize students when they're all struggling or the majority of them are struggling. So this is when staff referrals become even more important to leverage in our OnTrack process. And I know that this process at your schools has differed over the years. I know sometimes your OnTrack facilitators will send out a Google form. They might have QR codes up. They might just ask you to send them an email if you have a student you'd like to recommend. But this year, we are hoping to implement a standard form across all the schools that if you want to recommend a student, you have to fill out that form because it makes it way easier for your facilitator to follow up for you on that student, remember the student that you recommended, and track that for ongoing OnTrack meetings. Now, I know in the past there's been a little bit of a barrier with this because it can be just another form to fill out, but I'm hoping to make this as digestible and easy for you to use. So if that's literally 2 questions of student name and number and reason why you're recommending, then that's what I'm going to do. And if you have any insight on that, I'm happy to get some recommendations. If you've used a form like that in the past and you have recommendations for it, I'm happy to kind of shape what I create for you guys because it is for you guys and I don't want it to just be another thing. But these are the 2 main pathways for a student to be recommended to the OnTrack process. Once this happens and the facilitator has the student prioritized and identified, they will gather all the student data, test scores, grades, behavior, attendance, and they will facilitate a conversation in your OnTrack meetings about how to best move forward and what the root cause of that student's challenge is. So finally, I do want to just talk about GC Source for 1 second. I host trainings on GC Source throughout the entire duration of the school year, but if you do want to attend a training on how to utilize GC Source and all of the dashboards that it has for you, I'm happy to share those training dates for you. There's already several on the PD portal for the beginning of the school year, and those will be at MT Anderson, so just let me know if you want those dates. But GC Source is an incredible tool that I wish more staff in schools would use because it is applicable to not just facilitators and admin, but counselors, teachers, anybody in the school who wants to see their students' data and kind of identify some themes and patterns and to help support them. GC Source is an in-house application. We developed it here at Greenville County Schools. It is unique to us. And what it does is it pulls all of the data that we have in PowerSchool, Enrich, Backpack, Incidents, any application that you guys might use in the schools that house student, staff, and school data and information. It pulls from all those places and aggregates it into one spot, into lots of pretty charts and reports and dashboards and visuals and statistics that make it really easy for you to go in and quickly see demographics of referrals, referral information, course performance for your students, attendance rates for your school and your classroom. Lots of really easily accessible information that can inform you moving forward. It does all of that and lots more. There are different levels of access. So for instance, if you're a teacher, you can only see individual student information for the students that are assigned to you in your power school. But if you're a counselor or an admin or a facilitator, you can have school-wide access, and that allows you to see a lot more. But if you ever have any questions about this, I do conduct trainings on this, like I said, so I'm happy to walk you through that at a different time. Yeah.
Where do we find this?
So it is on the employee portal. So if you go to the employee portal, and then it's under 2 different tabs. If you just go to all apps, I think the all apps tab, it's literally just called GC Source.
Okay.
Yep. You do need to be granted access to it. So your first line of access command is your principal. So ask your principal first, and they should be able to grant you access to that depending on your level of access. Any other questions about GC Source? This is what your facilitators use to get all of your students' data and information before your on-track meetings. But it is also very useful to teachers and anybody at the school level. So I encourage you to either attend a training or play around with it on your own. There's a lot of really cool stuff in there. All right. So throughout the presentation, we do have a couple of quotes that we have pulled from evaluations that Taylor will talk about and surveys that we've sent out to schools. And this is just a really nice quote that's applicable to what we're talking about. So a teacher at one of your schools said that, "I've had some conversations with the team that when they said what was going on, it just totally opened my eyes as to why the student was behaving that way or shutting down. This is the first school I've ever been in that's had the OnTrack program, and to me, it's amazing. I'm such a proponent of it." And this also magnifies another thing I forgot to mention, that in the OnTrack process, like I said, we look at A, B's, and C's. But in addition to that, we do encourage looking at the child as a whole. So obviously a lot of our students may be struggling in attendance, behavior, and course performance, but the root cause is something entirely different. Our OnTrack teams are trained, and we provide them professional development opportunities to learn how to identify what the root cause is, because a lot of the times it's emotional struggles, mental struggles, home issues. There's a lot that's going on with students nowadays, and well, there's always been a lot going on with students, but specifically right now and at your schools, these children have a lot going on, and it's really important to look at the child as a whole, and this just kind of exemplifies how our facilitators are trained to look at the child as a whole and more as use the data to back up those discussions as with evidence and data. All right, so before I finish up, I do just want to mention that we have OnTrack Foundations trainings at the beginning of the year as well, and these are the 2 dates that we've already scheduled on the professional development portal. It is labeled as for new facilitators, but it is open to any staff member that wants to learn more about the OnTrack process and how the team works and roles and responsibilities. And I would highly encourage anybody at an OnTrack Greenville school like you guys to attend it, just to know more about the process and know how it works and what the facilitator needs from you and how to best support your students in that way. So like I said, open to anyone. The next 2 trainings will be on the 17th and the 22nd. They're already on the PD portal. Feel free to sign up for those. And I'll also send you the ones for GC Source as well. Those will be a little bit later, towards the end of August, early September. But I do just want to put those 2 dates up there for right now.
Now that we've taken this high-level look at the OnTrack process and the OnTrack meetings, remember this is happening in all 100 schools within Greenville County Schools. However, OnTrack Greenville is unique to your school. So we're going to dig a little bit into what is OnTrack Greenville and then the why behind OnTrack Greenville. Because we know that all students benefit from supports and resources. Some students need more supports and resources. And when the work of OnTrack Greenville began about 8 years ago, it began with the recognition that some schools need more. We can't take an equality approach to student outcomes, but instead we need to take more of an equity approach. So what does it look like to provide more where more is needed? So really the question becomes, why do some schools need more support? And I like to think of that as the tale of two cities. So if you have been in Greenville for a while, or if you're new here, you're going to hear a lot about Greenville on the news, not just locally, but also nationally. You're going to see those top 10 lists, top 10 places to visit, to move to, top 10 places where there are new job opportunities. People are flocking to upstate South Carolina. That's wonderful, and there's a lot of great things that come from that. I fully acknowledge I'm not from here. I'm part of that movement towards upstate South Carolina. And despite all the growth we've been experiencing, there's also some realities that are often overlooked. And one of those is that the continued poverty in Greenville is staggering. So if you've ever been to the Bon Secours Wellness Arena, imagine every single seat. We could not fit all the children living in poverty in that arena. And that was polled back in 2017. So we think about everything that's happened in our community in the years since. And we know that that number is continuing to rise. We've got a lot of students who are living in poverty, and yet you drive down downtown Greenville, or if you're on the east side of Greenville, you may not see it. You see brand new homes, you see jobs, you see all this prosperity. And you can wonder, well, where is it? Where is this poverty? How is it that all these students are living in poverty? Because I don't personally see it. And it's because we pushed it. So the west side of Greenville County has really become an area where families have been funneled. So the White Horse Road corridor historically was a textile mill industry. So there's a lot of thriving industry happening. And then when the textile mill industry really imploded, there weren't the jobs to backfill. And so what we have is a lot of people who are ready and eager to work, but not a lot of jobs. We have families say, I found a job, but it's on the east side of the county. How am I going to get there? We don't have a strong public transit system in Greenville that helps families get from one part of the community to another. And as housing prices continue to rise up, a lot of our families are getting displaced because rent is going up and up and up. And so we have is families who are getting funneled along an area where there are fewer opportunities. And instead of poverty being kind of dispersed, so it's something that we just see and we can recognize, it's something that often ends up hidden. I find it to be an interesting exercise to ask people in the community, when's the last time you went on White Horse Road? And if you don't necessarily if you're not working at a school there, or if you don't have family there, a lot of people don't frequent the west side of the county because there's not a lot of opportunities for tourism, and there's not a lot of shops or businesses that they may know of. They're there, but they don't have that awareness. And so what we have is this concentration of poverty, and we see it disproportionately in these 6 schools. And that's what really drove the work of OnTrack Greenville, to understand how do these larger community factors end up impacting youth who also wear the hat of being a student. So we look at poverty. There are many ways to slice and dice poverty. This is a really helpful SC report card poverty index. So what it's looking at is the percent of students who are transient or runaway, in foster care, homeless, or have been Medicaid eligible or qualified for SNAP or TANF services within the last 3 years. So even with that, outside of this, we know that some families are right on the cusp. They make just enough that they don't hit these thresholds, but they're not stable. They're constantly in flux. They're still very vulnerable. But even using this definition, 60% of all students in Greenville County are in poverty. When we look at our OnTrack Greenville schools, we're looking at 85 to 94% poverty. When you look at the concentration of poverty, it creates a really different landscape. So someone who's very connected to the work of OnTrack Greenville grew up in poverty, but grew up in a fairly affluent area. And he talks a lot about seeing prosperity around him, gave him a very clear path of how he goes from where he was at the time to where he wanted to be. He could see that college that he wanted to go to. He could see job opportunities. He could meet people who had walked that path. He got connected to internships. He built that social capital that lets you tap into resources as you're trying to find that first job, or you're trying to figure out how do you close the gap of tuition. All those resources that are here in Greenville, but are not accessible to everyone. When you have an intense concentration of poverty, you have generational poverty. And you've got families and caregivers who didn't get to experience opportunities and aren't sure how to build connection and don't know how to leverage some of the social capital that's available here in Greenville. As a result of this concentration of generational poverty and rising housing prices, a lot of our families move frequently. So who here loved their middle school experience? Okay, not most of us. Middle school's rough. Middle school's not a fun period of time. Now, imagine your middle school experience. Step back into that period of time, and imagine it's November. You come home, and whoever the adult in your home says, hey, we're moving. We're going to go ahead and we're going to move in with your aunt, but because we're moving in with your aunt, we're going to be rezoned. You're not going to go into a new middle school. And you get reestablished, and you try to make new friends, you step in midstream, and you finally find your stride, and then next spring, hey, guess what? I'm doing better. I really want to be able to move into our own place. Finally got first month's rent, last month's rent, the deposit. I've saved it all up. In order for us to afford housing, we've now got to move over here. And now you're in an entirely different school. It happens to a lot of our students. Nearly half of our students will move schools at least one time during middle school. So we think about the broader systems that are in play where it's not the fault of a school, but it becomes in a lot of ways the responsibility of a school to identify how do we see those kids who are coming and leaving midstream. What are the ways that we make students feel welcome when they walk in November and they don't have a backpack and they don't have the resources available, or it's March and they're a newcomer not just to our school but to the country. So we have a lot of students who are experiencing this transiency, and that's one of the opportunities and one of the challenges that we face. How do we create that warm, welcoming environment where regardless of when you enter or when you exit, you know that you belong, because that belonging matters for all of us. We also have a much higher portion of students of color. So because of just the history of the South, we have a very strong intersection when it comes to our demographics and to poverty. That's just a reality. And so as we've had our more vulnerable families displaced and concentrated, we've seen an increase in our students of color. And that's been most strongly seen in our Hispanic population, which has grown substantially from 2016 through the 21-22 academic year. And a lot of our students are newcomers. So they are not only learning English as a second language, but they also may be coming in with limited literacy skills, or caregivers that have no English skills, or have a very different experience with an education system, or some very understandable distrust of systems in general. So think about how do we create inclusive and welcoming spaces? How do we translate materials? How do we think outside the box in terms of making sure that families feel welcome to come and turn out for events? Because if not, it can very easily lead to the assumption that families don't care. When they rally, I've never met a caregiver that doesn't care. They just may not feel welcome, or may not be setting up opportunities that align with transportation or scheduling, or not understanding some of the broader barriers that are in place. So these are conversations that OnTrack Greenville schools are constantly having because it's just built into the fabric of our schools. Now, all of this really converged about 8 years ago into the formation of an initiative. So we are housed within United Way of Greenville County. And our vision is a Greenville County where every student achieves their full potential. And that's a lofty generational goal. But we can make it a little bit more tangible when we think about what are the supports and resources and partnerships that are step one. And if we look at our 6 schools, our OnTrack Greenville schools, if we figure out what works, then we can take those lessons and we can transmit them to schools that have fewer vulnerable students. Because if it can work for 94% of students in poverty, it can work for a school with 45% of students. Another thing that drives this is our graduation rates. When we think about all of these stacking risk factors and challenges and unique opportunities that are at play, we're losing a lot of our students along the way. So across Greenville County over time, our graduation rates remain pretty stable at 85%. That's not our end goal, that's where we're at right now. Think about our 2 high schools, we're sitting at right around 70-72%. COVID was really hard for our kids. They were disproportionately impacted by it on a lot of levels. So a lot of our students ended up leaving to help provide income for families, trying to navigate what was going on. And so we've got to think about what are all the unique things that they are facing that we can help address as a community so that they can focus on their academics. Because as Allie mentioned, we're looking at a whole child. A student is just, that's a hat that they put on when they walk in the building every day, but they're still first and foremost a child. Much like you first and foremost are a person. You might be an educator, a counselor, an administrator. That's a hat that you wear, and maybe a really important hat to you, but it's not the only hat that you wear. So the OnTrack Greenville initiative is really focused on how do we look at all the other hats? How do we look at the whole child to figure out what are the supports they need so that when they show up to school every day, they can be ready to learn. And so while we are very focused on improving graduation outcomes, we also want to care about the whole child. And we don't want to just get you to the finish line. So if we get you to graduation day, you walk across that stage, you hold that diploma, and you go, what's next? The community's failed you. If you don't understand how do you leverage that to be college or career ready, what are we going to do? And so that's really the whole district-wide G+ movement that we want to backbone and we want to support, and we want to provide special opportunities to OnTrack Greenville high school students. So how do your high school students have unique opportunities for internships, job placements? What are ways that we can ensure that when they walk across that stage, they have confidence about what's next? Who here has ever tried to get connected to a support or resource and it's felt a little bit like this? Chaotic, discombobulated, trying to figure out mentoring or different services, and it's just a mess. This is taking way too much time and energy. I don't have the capacity to figure this all out. There's all this red tape. And this is what a lot of schools encounter. The work of OnTrack Greenville, in part, is to create a smooth pathway. Because we recognize that schools don't have the time and resources to figure out why a partner's not responding, or to figure out why the funding stream for this other partner changed and how now they can only serve these certain students, and then what about the other students they used to serve now they can't. So that's our job, is to step in and figure out how to create a smooth pathway between partners and schools. And here are some of the ways that we are serving in terms of mentoring, programming for both summer and after school, case management, school-based help, and then family-wide assistance. So to do that, we really occupy three main areas. The first is a bridge. So that is going out to the community and saying, we have heard that there is a need. The most recent example is family assistance, post-COVID. Family says, I think I can get myself to a stable point, but I need rent or utility help for the next few months. Because if I don't, we're gonna be displaced and we're gonna be couch surfing. And I don't want that for myself, I don't want that for my family. So we went out to the community and said, who is doing that? And in the peak of COVID, that became United Way. We were taking those funds, we were funneling out, we were directly helping thousands of families. Post-COVID, we identified our next partner to say, we're gonna pass this on to you, we're gonna fund your work, and you're gonna be that person. And so as we hear needs, as you encounter needs, we need your help to be responsive. So you've got that OnTrack facilitator in your building, stay in contact with them. If you've got ideas or there are partnerships you think that we could be leveraging that we're not, let them know. Every month they come together and they meet with Allison and I, and we just have a conversation around what's going on. So as you hear about things, let us know, because we can help serve that bridge to figure out how do we bring that partner into the broader fold of OnTrack Greenville. We also serve as a hub, so we convene all of our partners quarterly, figure out best practices, accountability. We fund a lot of the work that they're doing, so how do we make sure everybody's working together really smoothly? Then last, we want to magnify the impact. So if you did not stop by Human Services Research Institute, HSRI's table, they've got a dark green tablecloth, please do. Dr. Newton Curtis flew in from Portland to be here today. She leads our evaluation work for transparency and accountability and a really neutral outside perspective. We're not trying to evaluate our own work because we love what we do. I love what I do. Of course, I'm gonna be like this, we are making an impact. We want to step outside of ourselves and say, from someone who's looking at the outside in, is this working? And the way that we do that is through an outside evaluator. So HSRI probably will do a staff survey at some point in the spring. Your students will do a survey. You might get pulled into a focus group, interview, might help you pull together some families to have family focus groups. We know that there's a lot of requests from you to do surveys and to collect data, but it really does help us understand, are we doing the best to serve students and families well? Here are active partners available in your schools. Greenville Mentoring Collaborative. Who here has seen mentoring that kind of fell flat? So kind of started and then stopped, or that mentor just stopped showing up entirely? Mentoring, if it's not done well, can do more harm than good. If we match a student who's seeking a safe, trustworthy adult, that adult doesn't show up for them. It reinforces that adults cannot be trusted, that someone's not gonna have my back. And so the Mentoring Collaborative is developing a framework for best practices. If you wanna be part of the collaborative, you have to agree to certain tenets. You have to be consistent, you have to show up. You have to use the things that we know work, because otherwise you risk doing more harm than good, and we're not gonna ensure that you get matched to our schools. But if you want to do the good work, we're going to help create a smooth pathway because we know that our students benefit from mentoring. Bell Excel, this is most applicable for our middle schools. Our rising sixth graders go through Bell Excel. It's an intersection of social emotional learning and academics. So they are learning about math in the morning, water balloon fights in the afternoon. They are doing English lessons and they are going on college tours on Furman's campus. We funneled about 200 students through Bell Excel every summer. Really helps equip them to be middle school ready. Communities and schools. If you are in this room, you have a communities and schools site coordinator full-time in your building. You are one of the only schools in Greenville County that has that. A lot of our schools have 2 site coordinators. They are doing full-time case management. That student that's in the back of your classroom, you know they have so much potential because I don't have capacity to sit down and figure out why they're not turning in their homework. I know it's not a lack of their understanding, there's something else going on. Communities and schools. They will sit down, work with the student, work with the family, figure out study strategies, some accountability with attendance, work through behavioral challenges. They wear a lot of different hats. They case manage up to 50 students at a time. They are also, at the end of the day, people. So if you talk to CIS and they're like, I'm at capacity, stay in communication. Things will get moved around, but they are a great resource and do very deep, intensive work with students. They also do small groups. So they might be doing an anime club, they might be doing a social emotional learning group. They help create small communities within your building. Prisma Health serves as a medical hub inside of the school. That's a really unique resource. A lot of our students do not have a medical home. And so they end up in the emergency room for a lot of things that could have been addressed through a school-based health center. So any student who goes through the OnTrack process would benefit from being referred to school-based health. Leverage them, use them. Resources we do not use, we are at risk of losing. So please leverage that. Anything, whether it's physical, emotional, they can, at minimum, do a referral and figure out the best place for them to go. Public education partners, they're all the fun. So teacher appreciation weeks, grants, celebrations, also backbone learning, micro grants, they are heading up all of that. And last is infinite possibilities. They are doing family level assistance, rent, utility, gas, groceries. They're there for all of that. All of these resources are funneled in through OnTrack Greenville. We backbone a lot of that financially. And the way that students are able to access that is through the OnTrack process. So if students are not being referred the process, if we're not getting the input to understand how to prioritize, these partners sit underutilized. So our goal is to always max out our partners and then go find more. I always say, make my job harder, please. I want to fully use everything we have available so that people understand why these resources are needed in the first place. I love this quote. Our OnTrack facilitators are the heart of our work. So the quote is, if you want something done, you talk to the facilitator. You go straight to her because she gets stuff done. She just does it. She's like, all right, we're going to pull this kid, get them vision screening, and then 2 weeks later, it's done. But I think it's a great look into the role that an adult in a building, whether you are an educator, you're a counselor, you're an administrator, whatever hat you wear, you can serve as a critical bridge to helping a student get connected to the OnTrack process and get prioritized for resources. As a reminder, anywhere between 40 and 70% of the students in a school may be flagging red in one or more areas. You just wait for that student to happen to come up in line for a meeting. They may flag in August and they may not be spoken about until February. That's just the reality of where we're at right now. So if you see something, figure out what are the pieces you can pull and then get that information to your OnTrack facilitator. Now when they sit down, they've got a more clear picture of the whole child to help figure out maybe it is school-based health, maybe it's communities in the schools, it may be more than one support. But your knowledge and your insight to that student is a really important part of that puzzle. This is the OnTrack Greenville team. We are housed at United Way of Greenville County. We do everything we can to be in your buildings as much as possible. So you'll often see us out for teacher appreciation weeks, field days. If you've got something coming up where you need volunteers, let your OnTrack facilitator know. Our team will turn out. We love a chance to hang out with staff, to hang out with students, just to be a part of it all. But also know that if we're not in the building, we aren't doing anything else. This is our work. This is our heart. This is why we do what we do. It's to support these 6 schools. So sometimes that looks like grant writing or contracts or talking to partners and figuring out accountability. But more than anything, I just want to say welcome to OnTrack. Whether you're new or you're returning, you are part of a broader community, and we're really thankful.